What's going on, everyone? Coach Aaron here, back in another video. Today we're going to go over what's the best torso angle in the squat for you, and we're going to get started right now. Alrighty everyone, welcome to the video. For those of you who are returning back to the channel, thank you for tuning in to another video, and thank you for following my channel. For those of you who are new to the channel and don't know who I am, my name is Aaron Khamesi, and I'm a powerlifting athlete, coach, meet director, referee, scoring manager, do a little bit of everything. And I'm trying to put as many videos here on this channel that can help you depending on which area you fall into. Today's video is going to be all about the torso angle in the squat and figuring out what angle is best for you to be able to squat the most weight. The reason why I decided to put this video together is oftentimes I see online people always complaining about how they're too leaned over, or they think they're doing a good morning squat, or they wish they were upright as someone else looking at their squat. So I kind of want to break it down into some different sections so that you can go and analyze your squat and see whether you are using the proper torso angle for you and your variables. A key point that I'm mentioning here already is what's right for you. And so a lot of people try and compare themselves to others, and sometimes it's not a fair comparison because the person could be a different height, the person could be a different weight, the person could have different limb lengths, the person could set up in a different stance, different toe angle, different bar position, all that kind of stuff. You can't just focus on comparing yourself to every single person and thinking all these little variables are going to be exactly the same. There's lots of variables that come into play in figuring out the torso angle, and your variables may be different than that person. Some of the variables you may not be able to control, like your height or your limb lengths, but some of the variables you will be able to control, like your stance width and the bar position. In addition, once you set up all these different variables, the ones that you can't control and the ones that you can control, and you're doing a squat, whatever angle occurs in that squat is just going to depend on some key factors. For example, you want the foot flat on the floor the entire time. You don't want to be coming up onto your toes and the heels coming off the ground. You want the feet flat the entire time. You want to have the knees in line with the toes, okay? So preferably, you don't want the knees outside of the toes or the knees collapsing inside the toes. You want to keep the knees in line with the toes. You also want the bar over the midfoot or the center line. So if you drew a line from the middle of your foot straight up to the ceiling, you want the bar to stay on that path as much as possible during the descent and the ascent. So once you set up all these variables, your stance width, your bar position on your back, you're driving your knees out in line with your toes, you're hitting depth, you're having your feet flat, you're staying over that midfoot with the bar, whatever the angle is, that's the angle for you for that setup, okay? So you're not going to be trying to make it more upright and get the bar behind the midfoot, or you don't want to try and be like more leaned over and the bar up on the toes. Whatever it is, falling into that position and hitting these key points, that is what the angle is. So again, like I said, some of these things you're going to be able to control, some of the things you're not going to be able to control, but whatever you decide on for all these different variables and you go into your squat, whatever the angle is, that's what the angle is. As some say, it is what it is. All right, let's start going into these variables and start going through them one by one. And we'll start with a couple of them that you can't change. These are what you're born with. And the first one will be the femur length. So this is a big thing that people always talk about is, oh, I have very long femurs, I'm not good at squatting. Or some people say I have very short femurs, I'm good at squatting, but maybe I'm not good at deadlifting, something like that. So let's talk about the effect of the femur length. When we're going into looking at these single variables, we're trying to keep everything else the same. So we're not comparing changing stance width, bar position, everything with femur length. We're keeping all variables the same and saying you just have two people where they're doing the same exact stance, same bar position, they have the same injuries, they have the same method of squatting, and all we're doing is changing the femur length from whatever length to a longer length. So what happens when you extend the femur length is now your hips are farther away from the center line, okay? So in order to bring our torso and that bar over that center line, you're going to have to lean over more to be able to get that bar over that midfoot, okay? So the longer your femur is, keeping everything else equal, the torso is going to be more leaned over and you're going to have a smaller angle comparing the floor to your torso, okay? That angle in between. And the same thing again, so now if we go the other way and you have someone and you're comparing them to someone else who has a smaller femur, then their hip is going to be closer to that midfoot, which means their torso angle can be more upright and still have the bar over that midfoot. All right, next up, let's talk about the torso length. So now let's keep everything else the same, including the femurs now are the same. And we're taking two people that have different torso lengths, okay? So the torso, again, like we said, has to be a certain angle for the bar to be over the midfoot, okay? So it has to be able to travel this distance, which means if we have a bigger torso, we can be able to cover more distance. So if you have a longer torso, you're going to be able to have a more upright angle and be able to cover that distance to still have the bar over the midfoot. If you have a shorter torso, then you're going to have to lean over more to be able to get that bar over the midfoot. Next, let's start talking about some of these factors or some of these variables that you can change. So the first one we'll talk about is how forward your knees are going, okay? So the bar needs to be over this midfoot, and then the hips, however far they are from the midfoot, the more the torso is going to have to angle over. But what we can do is we can push the knees forward more, so a portion of your femur is going in front of the midfoot, and then a portion of your femur is behind the midfoot. So the more we're pushing the knees forward in front of the midfoot and towards the toes or in front of the toes, then we're effectively shortening our femur length as far as the distance of the hip from the midfoot. So now if we push our knees forward more, the hips are going to be able to come up closer, okay? And so now the hips are not as far from the midfoot, and you're going to be able to have a more upright torso to cover that distance. So now if we kept everything else equal and all we did was we pushed our knees forward more, our hips are going to be closer and we're going to be more upright. If we push our knees further back, then our hips are going to be farther and we're going to be more leaned over to get over that midfoot. Next, let's go over stance width, how wide you should go. And a variable that's connected with this, like I said in the beginning, is keeping the knees in line with the toes, okay? So now what we're doing by going with a wider stance and pushing the knees out is instead of our femur going front and back towards our toes or back toward our hips, our femurs can also now go out to the side. So now we're using more of that side to side direction and not just the front to back direction. So what we're doing is we're effectively shortening our femur length by pushing it out to the sides. So what we have is we're keeping all the other variables the same. We're taking a stance and you have to keep your knees in line with the toes. That's going to have the hips be a certain distance from the midfoot. Now if we take that stance and we double it and we push the knees out in line with the toes, now the hips are going to be closer to the midfoot. And what do we know when the hips are closer to the midfoot? Now we don't have to travel as far of a distance with the torso angle, and we're going to be able to be more upright with our torso. So when it comes to stance width, the farther out we go, the closer our hips are going to be, the more upright our torso is going to be. Next, let's go over bar position. You can use a high bar position, you can use a low bar position, and some people do a little bit of like that mid or hybrid where it's in between it, and some people even go like super low where it's actually like below the rear delts. So there's going to be an effect of the bar position because, as we've been saying, the bar has to be over the midfoot. So it doesn't necessarily matter the total length of your torso up to the top of your head or even the bottom of your head. It goes from the hip joint up to where the bar is actually placed. So what you're effectively doing by putting the bar lower on your back is you're artificially shortening your torso. So as we've gone over before, the shorter our torso is, the more we have to lean over to cover that distance. So if you take someone, keep everything else the same and move the bar from a high bar position to a low bar position, their torso is effectively shortened whatever that distance is, 1 inch, 2 inches. And so now they have to lean over more, that their torso is shorter by 1 or 2 inches to cover that distance and maintain that bar of the midfoot. So the higher the bar is, the longer the torso, the more upright they can be. The lower the bar is, the shorter the torso, the more leaned over they have to be. That may be a lot to take in, so let's quickly review it. Remember, we're looking at each factor in a vacuum. So we're keeping everything else the same, and we're just adjusting this one variable and just playing with this one variable or each variable one at a time. So when we keep everything else the same and we play with femur length, the longer the femur, the more leaned over we're going to be. When we play with torso length, the shorter the torso, the more leaned over we're going to be. When we go into knees forward or knees back, the further back our knees stay, the more leaned over we're going to be. When we go into stance width, the more narrow the stance width while keeping the knees in line with the toes, the more leaned over we're going to be. And when we go to bar position, the lower the bar position, the more leaned over we're going to be. Now, when you go out into the real world and you're actually in the gym testing out different squats by yourself or with your coach, you don't necessarily have to change one variable at a time. You can play with these different variables and change multiple things in multiple directions to get the torso angle you want. If you have some kind of specific injury that you're trying to work around, or you feel stronger in a certain position, or anything like that. But kind of going back to the beginning of the video, what I was discussing and kind of my thoughts when it comes to torso angle is to not worry about that much. If you don't have any specific injuries that you're trying to work around, and if you're able to maintain those basic positions that I mentioned of the feet flat on the ground, the knees in line with the toes, in addition to that, you want the neutral spine and actually being able to hit depth, then whatever torso angle happens to be for you and whatever stance you feel more comfortable with, whatever bar position you feel more comfortable with, whatever knees forward position you feel more comfortable with, then that is the torso angle for you. You shouldn't be trying to compare yourself to someone else just because of how strong they are or how accomplished they are, even though the variables may be completely different. And you shouldn't necessarily assume that a more upright torso is going to lead to you squatting more weight. In many cases, you'll see people like the low bar position more than the high bar position when it comes to powerlifting because they feel like they can do more weight. And when it comes to a lower bar position, you're actually going to be leaned over more. So there could be a case for the lower bar position, and a more leaned over torso angle is going to lead to a stronger squat for you. So you shouldn't necessarily be focusing on, oh, I need to be more and more upright, and I need my torso to be perfectly upright, like a weightlifter who's focusing on a clean and jerk or a snatch. Alright, so hopefully this video helped you out. If you want to learn more about squat and all these different little squat tips I have, I put a little playlist together for it. So I'll put the link to the playlist in the description below, and I'll put the little card for it above so you can go check it out whichever way you want. And you can go see the other squat videos I put together. And over time, as I make more and more squat videos, I'll throw it into the squat playlist. I also put it together a bench playlist and a deadlift playlist. So whatever lift you want to focus on, you can go look at that playlist. And I also have playlists for free programs or just general powerlifting tips, and then the powerlifting versus series. So whatever you're interested in looking at within my channel, you can always go look at the playlist and go watch the videos for that specific topic. Or if you just like watching all the videos, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with a friend who you think is complaining about their torso angle and may benefit from this video. I hope you're having a great day and you're gonna have a good weekend, and I'll see you next time.